We begin with the situation at the front. Analysts from the Deep State Project have reported another advance by Russian forces in the Donetsk region. This time, a change in the front line was recorded near the village of Udakne in the Pokrovsk direction. As of the evening of March 8th, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine confirmed extraordinary activity of the enemy in this area. The occupiers are trying to advance not only near Udakne, but also in the areas of Mirnohrad, Rodenske and Kotlina. And now we have the opportunity to learn about the operational situation on the Pokrovsk sector. We are joined now by Volodymyr Nazarenko, Major Deputy Commander of the 4th Battalion of the Svoboda Force 4th Rubizh Brigade. Mr. Volodymyr, greetings to you, glory to Ukraine.
Glory to the heroes, morning to the studio, morning to the viewers. Thank you for the chance to join your broadcast.
And dear viewers, right now you have the chance to support our defenders on the most difficult front in the Pokrovsk sector. As you can see, as is tradition when we communicate with the military. You see the QR code on the screen and the card number. I ask you to be active and to take part in this battle with Russia through your donations. Your support is very much needed. Support from the rear for our defenders on the front line. Tell us, what are you raising funds for? What do you need?
Truly, thank you very much for supporting the fundraiser for our brigade, the 4th Rubizh Brigade. This fundraiser is for a ground drone, a ground UGV, an unmanned drone like this, which it helps with logistics and most importantly, it helps with evacuation. Every day, especially as the weather conditions continue to improve, the kill zone expands, and accordingly, the flying conditions for various types of UAVs, particularly strike drones, get better, which means activity increases substantially. And that's why it's absolutely crucial that every single one of the logistical missions, all supplies and all evacuations are carried out with minimal risk to every Ukrainian serviceman. And this is particularly true for the drivers. Previously, if you remember, back in the years of 2014 to 2015, or more recently in 2022 to 2023 and into 2024, when we used to drive pickups or heavy armored vehicles, now under these current conditions where the enemy is constantly monitoring the so-called rear zone, the lower the risk for the driver, the greater the chances that the enemy won't strike our fellow comrades and our servicemen. Wherever we can replace something with unmanned systems, we need to replace everything with unmanned systems. And in this case, UGVs mean life. They deliver water, fuel, and other necessary supplies that are so essential for survival. And every day, both our Freedom Force Battalion and our brigade carry out a significant number of logistical operations specifically using UGVs. First of all, they are significantly more difficult to spot for the enemy compared to a car, a pickup truck, or any kind of heavy armored vehicle. And secondly, it is still a means that operates without the involvement of a driver. And most importantly, a UGV is a tool that at any time and whenever possible can quickly carry out an evacuation. Therefore, accordingly, every donation matters. This is a donation to save someone's life, in particular the life of a Ukrainian serviceman and Ukrainian hero. And it is also an indirect but effective method of protecting the safety and life of the driver who will be remotely operating this UGV, instead of actually being present there physically sitting behind the wheel. So thank you very much for your morning so-called coffee. On Monday morning, a fundraiser for our brigade began. This is extremely important for us.
Helping to save the lives of our defenders is a wonderful way to start the week, a wonderful way to start a new day. So join in, I urge you as well. Mr. Volodymyr, the Institute for the Study of War reported in its latest update that counteractions in the Oleksandrivka direction in the Zaporizhzhia and Dnipropetrovsk regions have forced the Russian command to change its strategic plans for the spring-summer offensive. Specifically, they are being forced to move their more combat-ready units from the east to the south. Have you noticed a decrease in enemy pressure in the Pokrovsk direction because of this?
It's quite difficult to track whether the pressure is increasing or decreasing. The enemy, in a certain way, maintains the pace of the tactics they've been using for over a year now. That is, it's the tactic of infiltration by small groups, when little squads of 2, 3, or 4 try to make their way along well-trodden paths within the so-called kill zone. From one shelter to another burrow, from a burrow to a dugout. Every single day they continue in this way, and the difficult path of these small groups can take not just a few days, the path of these small groups can actually take many weeks. And in this specific way, they try to slowly infiltrate and infiltrate further, living in these makeshift shelters and underground burrows. Without any proper supplies, without any proper logistics, and without adequate drinking water, food, or other basic necessities. So it's quite difficult, but movement continues. In most cases, these are low-quality, hastily assembled enemy mercenaries to whom they made promises. They were promised large sums of money for signing the so-called contract and ended up on the battlefield with very poor and insufficient training. But unfortunately, there are also some significantly better prepared enemy units that have, let's say, a high level of training or have undergone extensive preparation, or even they have a certain amount of experience. Among the occupiers, there are those from the second and third waves, meaning there are even some who have survived until now and have served in the occupiers' army for quite a long time. But obviously what is happening now and what our comrades are doing on the southern front, on the Zaporizhzhia direction, these actions are having an effect. Accordingly, the enemy is forced to somehow distribute their reserves along the entire eastern line, along the whole front line. Unfortunately, the enemy still has these resources. There is a huge number of personnel reserves, the cheapest force for the occupiers, which they can quickly move as reserves or reinforcements from one direction to another. In fact, these disposable orcs, who serve as mere cannon fodder for the enemy, it doesn't really matter to them where they are deployed, whether in the Pokrovsk direction or in any other specific sector of the east or south. And so these reserves are sent here and there. But the common thing is that they are disposable. Quite often there have been cases which we have published on our brigade's social media where there is not enough provision for these dugouts, these bunkers where the occupiers are sitting. The occupiers either forcibly drive out their own people, severely restrict their supplies, or even shoot them in order to conserve some provisions, food, and logistical support right at the front line in these dugouts. For example, it will be quite difficult to supply even the most fundamental necessities like water, food, or canned goods. Accordingly, for the orcs, I repeat, their expendable assault force, their cannon fodder, is the most abundant and cheapest resource they have, and they make almost no effort whatsoever to preserve it.
In the 7th Rapid Response Corps of the Air Assault Forces, which commands troops in the Pokrovsk direction, it was reported that the Russians are amassing forces and preparing for increased activity and an offensive. Exactly that. At present, the enemy has concentrated its efforts on advancing toward Hrishin, which is northwest of Pokrovsk. Tell us, what is the situation there? What tactics are the Russians using? Are they sticking to the same ones you mentioned, or are they moving on to larger-scale mechanized assaults?
They have conducted such assaults recently, so no one is safe from large-scale mechanized attacks. The enemy tries to use them during bad weather because the experience of the autumn campaign, when the enemy tried to use armored columns about a dozen times, shows that they were successfully repelled and defeated. They were detected at a very significant and long distance away at a considerable range. And in most cases, these mechanized columns are completely destroyed. The enemy is defeated thanks to the successful work of highly skilled strike UAV operators who essentially just systematically dismantle and smash these mechanized columns. Well, and in fact, the landing force that may be inside the armor or riding on top of the occupiers' armored vehicles is destroyed by long-range 155mm artillery. In other words, the occupiers have no chance when attempting such mechanized assaults. In most cases now, the enemy still continues to adhere to the tactic of infiltrating with small groups, essentially using cannon fodder, trying to slip through along well-trodden paths, but this does not bring them any significant success. Because, well, once again, during January and February, we saw variable weather conditions, meaning there were severe frosts, and in some places, thick fogs would set in. The enemy tried to use these fogs to their advantage. However, these fogs did not bring the enemy much success, as there were no recorded breakthroughs or significant advances. All these enemy attempts were successfully detected and destroyed. Here, the coordinated work of all units is evident. In particular, our brigade and the soldiers of our brigade work together very effectively. When the enemy is detected, both strike UAVs, airdropped munitions, mortars, and artillery are used. And the most important work is done in the close combat by our infantry brothers, who in these forest skirmishes thwart the enemy's attempts to advance. And in particular, once again, I invite you to visit and check out our brigade's social media, where you can see exactly how our scouts captured a specific group of enemy soldiers when they tried to advance and were hiding in some kind of dugout. Frightened, without provisions and without anything at all, they basically surrendered because they understood it was their only real chance to preserve their own lives. And this is happening all along the Pokrovsk direction. Now, as it has gotten considerably warmer, the logistical conditions have changed again. The ground is incredibly wet and muddy, basically a swamp for the occupier. It is much more challenging for them to advance. Apparently, indeed, the occupier The high command of the enemy forces is currently waiting for the start of the green season to amass their forces and, under the protective cover of the greenery, continue this tactical approach. But this does not mean that their hostile actions have completely stopped for now. The enemy is still consistently maintaining a high operational tempo, both in their attempts to advance and in the losses they incur. Because every single day, and specifically in the operational area of our brigade and our battalion, the enemy continues to suffer significant losses in their manpower. Wounded as well. In other words, occupiers are being eliminated every day. And every day the enemy tries to advance, tries to regroup, tries to supply these small groups. They are being destroyed by tactical strike UAVs. That is to say, every single day the intense tempo of the war, the fire of the war, does not diminish. And once again, the occupiers are suffering huge losses.
While you were speaking just now, our directors were showing some video footage from the small village of Ryshain, as I understand it. And we can clearly see that this village as well. The Russians are trying to turn it into ruins. I'll ask our directors to replay it. How intensively are they using aviation for this? Or is this the result of enemy artillery fire? The enemies?
The scorched earth tactic hasn't gone anywhere since 2022, since the battles for the east, meaning Popasna, Rubizhne, Sieverodonetsk, Bakhmut. The enemy continues to build up and refine this tactic. Now, in addition to artillery shelling, there are also bombardments from rocket systems like Grads, Uragans, and so on, as well as a huge number of KABs, FABs, and other aerial munitions. By the way, the enemy is also using a very large number of Molnias, Lancets, and strike UAVs. That is, these same Shaheds are used not only against distant, peaceful rear areas of Ukraine, but the enemy also uses them on frontline cities and towns in order to constantly turn house after house into ruins. That is, for 10, 15, 20 kilometers from the front line, there is nothing but ruins, nothing but traces left by the enemy. Explosions, shrapnel, destroyed roofs, shattered panes, broken windows. In other words, not a single intact window remains. Every day, almost every hour, the enemy uses aviation. This is a continuation of their scorched earth tactics, a fiery onslaught. They understand that in a conventional battle they have no chance, so they try to use their advantage in resources to gain the upper hand on the battlefield. But their only real advantage is in the sheer number of losses they can sustain.